What is up, adventurers? I am in a different room. I am house sitting. So if I sound a little different, if I look a little different, it's because I'm not in my usual recording area, as I'm sure you can tell. At least if you've been here before. If you haven't, welcome to the channel. I am Half Sanity, aka Jacob, like a normal people name, and I like to talk about D&D. Today I have a build video for yas, because for a long time I have wanted to build a character that uses Hail of Thorns a lot, and I also have wanted to make a warlock that is an archer. So blending those ideas right up together, we have this thing. I should start naming my builds. I don't know what to call this one though. I would call it Arcane Archer, but that's already a thing. Tell you what, if you come up with a good one, put it in the comments. Compared to Divine Smite, Hail of Thorns does deal slightly less damage, but otherwise it functions very much the same, and not just Divine Smite, but the other Smite spells as well, of course, in that when we hit a creature with a ranged weapon, specifically, in the 2014 rules it used to be a ranged weapon or a thrown melee weapon, but that is no longer the case, unfortunately. It does have to be a ranged weapon, like a bow or a crossbow, a sling, a firearm, something like that. When we do hit with such a weapon, we can use a bonus action and spend the spell slot, of course, to cast the Hail of Thorns spell, and the target and each creature within 5 feet of it has to make a dexterity saving throw. If they fail, they take a d10 of piercing damage, and that number scales up 1d10 per spell slot level above burst. That's not a very large AoE, but considering that none of the Smite spells have an area of effect, it's already looking pretty good in certain situations. Like if we have an enemy that's mounted on another enemy, like a goblin riding a warg, or a Githyanki riding on a red dragon, something like that, then of course we're going to be able to hit 2 creatures with Hail of Thorns. That's automatic. Otherwise, enemies tend not to group up that closely together all the time, but sometimes they might. It's hard to say for sure. And Hail of Thorns does have friendly fire, so if a bunch of targets surround your party barbarian, you might be able to hit a few of them at once, but you'll probably also hit the barbarian in the process. They might be okay with that, but it is going to happen. And of course, when we're talking about a spell like the Smites or like Hail of Thorns, heck, even like Entangle or Lightning Arrow that deal the same sort of on-hit damage, we of course can compare them to other spells like Conjure Animals or Conjure Woodland Beings that also deal damage in an area of effect, but more reliably. And that's not the point of the build, frankly. The point is to be an archer, shoot people with arrows, blow them up with Hail of Thorns, and have a good time doing it. Just because we may not be using the #1 best spell for the situation doesn't mean we're not effective and doesn't mean we're not having fun. One of my D&D hot takes is that the Smite spells don't actually deal that much damage for their slot level. They are pretty inefficient. If you consider something like, I don't know, Fireball, of course the 3rd level spell is going to do a heck of a lot more damage than a 3rd level Divine Smite ever will. At least Hail of Thorns gets to tack that damage onto an existing attack action. Especially useful once we have extra attack and things like that. The total damage that we're dealing on our turn is actually not half bad, but we will get to all of that. I considered building a ranged character by cobbling together a Warlock for rapidly recharging 5th level spell slots, and 3 attacks per action with Devouring Blade, at level 12 of course, a little bit later in the progression, with a bit of Ranger to actually get Hail of Thorns in the first place, and to grab the archery fighting style feat. But having to raise dexterity, wisdom, and charisma, and of course not dump constitution, because that's usually not a good idea. I should know, I've done it plenty of times, can be a bit rough. Although, we are helped by the fact that Pact of the Blade can allow us to use charisma as our attack ability score, meaning that we don't actually need that much dexterity. We can leave that at 14, and wear medium armor. We're actually going to leave dexterity at 13 at character creation, because we will be taking a feat, I'm sure you can guess which one, pretty early on that will raise it to 14. It's going to be a little painful on our armor class at the start of the game, but once we're a few levels in, it'll work itself out. Other than that, we want 17 in our charisma and 16 in our wisdom, as those are going to be our main stats for our spellcasting, our attack and damage rolls once we do have Pact of the Blade, and to be honest, wisdom is mostly for setting the DC of our Hail of Thorns. If we could find a way to do that with charisma, that would be incredible, but I can't think of one. Bards can't even steal this spell anymore because they can only get their spells off the wizard, cleric, and druid spell lists in addition to their own. This only leaves us room for 12 in Constitution, but considering we're going to be an archer, we're going to be trying to stay away from danger anyway, and we will have plenty of ways to do that, as you'll see. That's not actually probably going to be that bad. With D8s for our hit dice and a few D10s from our ranger levels, we're not going to be doing too badly on HP. Considering we'll be in the backline, hopefully not getting hit too much. Speaking of ability scores, though, for our background, we are stuck with Wayfarer, Hermit, or Acolyte because we want those bonuses to Wisdom and Charisma, and those are the only 3 in the book out of the 16 available that give both Wisdom and Charisma. Hope you're happy with the Lucky Healer or Magic Initiate Cleric feats. Or we could just customize a background and not have to worry about it. That's what I always go for, but I felt like I should probably show why a little more in my videos, so there you go. Hopefully that makes sense to y'all. None of the origin feats are really imperative for the build anyway, so if you're happy with the Wayfarer flavor, or Hermit or Acolyte, and the feats those come with, then great, go ahead and do that. I am going to write my own backstory because I always do, because I have like 40-something characters at this point, and frankly, the backgrounds in the player's handbook are a little stifling at this point to me. Not a problem with how they're written in the book, just I have too many characters. I've been leaving species out of these build videos for a while because I want to make sure that y'all, if you take the build and run with it on your own, have the freedom that every player character should have to be the character you want to make them. Tell the story that you want to tell. And species goes a long way toward that individuality and that customizability. However, I realized that making my version of this build for the video an actual character with like a personality might be more interesting to watch. So for my part, I'm making this character a Harengon, and he's going to be a servant and protector of the forests, the Feywild, and in service to an Archfey. That is a little bit of a spoiler on our Warlock subclass, but I'm sure you could see it coming in. Harengon can add their proficiency bonus to their initiative rolls, can jump as a bonus action, a number of feet equal to 5 times their proficiency bonus without provoking opportunity attacks. That's one of those ways we can stay out of danger that I was mentioning a minute ago. And they also can add 1d4 as a reaction to a failed dexterity saving throw. Very useful when we are up against fireballs and such. And even gain proficiency in the perception skill. Also, size doesn't really matter for this build because even though we're going to be using a longbow, the rules no longer specify that small creatures have disadvantage with heavy weapons. Now it's based on our stats. Since we have at least 13 dexterity, in fact we have exactly 13 dexterity, we're going to be just fine in that regard. So let's be a small Harengon, because that seems like fun. Jumping around, shooting enemies with arrows. And we'll take our first level in Ranger to avoid any awkward levels where we couldn't use the gear that we're building toward using. Our attacks will be slightly weak using dexterity for the first couple of levels, which is a bit unfortunate, but by the time we have a couple of Warlock levels, it'll work itself out. Just growing pains for the first little bit. We can start the game with either scale mail or a chain shirt by taking the gold starting equipment instead of the set of items listed in the Ranger class, and which one we go with just depends how much we care about having disadvantage on stealth, and whether that's worth an extra point of armor class. Personally, I don't really think it is for me, but choose whichever you feel speaks to your character best. So I'm going with the chain shirt until I can afford a breastplate, then we just need to grab a longbow and we are off to the races. We get Hunter's Mark at this level, of course, always prepared, and we get to cast it for free a number of times, equal to our proficiency, well, not really equal to our proficiency bonus. The levels line up, but it's only ranger levels, so we're only ever going to have 2 casts of this, but realistically, that's plenty. Hunter's Mark is actually pretty good at low levels. I've actually never cast it myself, despite having 2 rangers and at least 1 other character with a few ranger levels, but blanket statement, it's actually not that bad. It does eat our bonus actions, but in early levels, what else kind of are we doing with those? And getting to cast it for free without a spell slot means our spell slots can be dedicated to other things like Hail of Thorns. Not just Hunter's Mark, Rangers also get spellcasting full on at level 1 now. Paladins do too. I think it's a wonderful change. So we can grab Hail of Thorns right away to deal some area damage. 1d10 doesn't seem like a lot on paper, and depending how we roll, isn't. But it is enough that if we're fighting something like goblins, kobolds, cultists, quote unquote, like the literal cultist stat block, if we roll a 7, 9, 10, we can kill those things in 1 hit with just Hail of Thorns, not even including the damage from the arrow. So if they group up, if there are 4 goblins in a tight corridor, we could ostensibly 1-hit kill all of them, which is incredible for level 1. We do have to roll fairly well on the damage die for that, and the targets do have to succeed, or do have to fail, their saving throw. But it is possible, and that's more than a lot of first level characters can say. There are other really good first level spells too, like Jump and Cure Wounds, to name a couple more. So pick your favorites, pick the ones you feel are going to be most useful for your campaign. Keep in mind we do have that Harengon Jump also, which will allow us to jump 10 feet, including vertically if we need it. So we might not actually need the jump spell that badly on this character. It is really good in general in the 2024 rules, basically adding 20 to our move speed, because it costs 10 feet of movement to use the jump spell Jump for a 30-foot horizontal and or vertical leap. At level 2, we'll go Ranger again and take the Archery Fighting Style. I'm betting you can guess we were going to do that, but I had to say it anyway. The +2 to attack rolls with ranged weapons is kind of too good to pass up. That is 2 faces on the d20 that hit now instead of missing. And considering we don't have the best dexterity, that's going to help a lot from level 2 to level 4 and help cover that weakness for us. And it's going to stay useful the entire length of the campaign. This will never not be a strong bonus for us. We also get expertise in 1 skill at this level, and we're going to go with Persuasion, which might seem a little odd for a ranger, but we'll get around to why in a bit. Our charisma is also really good, so we're likely to be the face of the party anyway, unless there are other charisma casters around. So having a high persuasion bonus is gonna be a good thing, especially considering some other bonuses we're going to be getting later. We'll get there. We also get 2 languages, so pick whichever ones you feel are going to be most useful in your campaign. If you're adventuring through giant territory, that's probably one worth picking. If you're in the Underdark, Undercommon is great, and maybe Abyssal for some demon stuff, if there's that going on still down there. Sylvan is an obvious choice for the Fey nature of our build, if we don't already have that, just to name a few examples. At level 3, we're going to kick off our Warlock multi-class, finally signing the deal with our Fey patron to get some extra magic in service to our goals. We get Pact Magic, and here we're going to probably want to take True Strike to start attacking with Charisma. It doesn't play nice with extra attack, or Thirsting Blade as the case may be, but for the first few levels it will be a nice addition. And it'll even do some extra damage in the weird levels between getting to level 5 and actually getting our second attack, considering the multi-class there. Normally I would say we could take Agonizing Blast as we get our first invocation at this level. However, well, we could do that. I think it's more cool and fun to have a familiar, so Pact of the Chain is usually an obvious choice for me. And what better companion for a small Fey archer creature to have than an even smaller Fey archer creature? We can take a Sprite familiar when we cast the spell, and play as 2 Fey. I will also say, if you somehow already have a magic bow by this point, go ahead and take Pact of the Blade, as that'll allow us to attack with charisma all the time. We could go True Strike instead and maybe get that little extra damage for a couple levels, but it's frankly not that necessary. We can't use Pact of the Blade to summon a bow normally. We can only bind one that's already magical. That is raw, and that is rules as intended. That's been stated by the developers before, plenty of times in the last 10 years, 11 years. So go ahead and once we find a magic bow, bind it as a pact weapon once we have that invocation. But if your DM lets you start with a +1 bow, or even just a common longbow or shortbow even, that doesn't really do much, but is still a magic weapon, that can be bound as a pact weapon as well. So if that's the case, go ahead and take Pact of the Blade at level 1. Otherwise, it's going to have to wait until Warlock level 2, which is totally fine. At level 2, we do get 2 more invocations, so we can take Pact of the Blade and we can take Improved Pact Weapon. That allows us to summon a longbow or shortbow, light or heavy crossbow. And the weapon counts as +1. It gets +1 to attack and damage rolls if it doesn't already have a bonus to those rolls as a magic weapon. That part's important if we have something like a vicious weapon, vicious longbow, that adds 2d6 damage when we hit with it, but doesn't have that numeric bonus of +1, +2, or +3 to attack and damage rolls. A vicious weapon would still get that bonus from Improved Pact Weapon. How awesome is that? Warlocks rule. At this point, we technically don't need our physical longbow that we started the game with, so we could actually just ditch that, although it's probably not a bad idea to have a real weapon around just in case. And we can even use our Pact Weapon as a focus for our Warlock spellcasting. Awesome. Warlock level 3 gets us 2nd level Pact Magic slots, meaning both of our Warlock spell slots are now 2nd level. We can do 2d10 damage with Hail of Thorns, pretty good for still being low level. We can grab the invisibility spell if we'd like to be a bit sneakier, and especially because the sprite that I mentioned a couple levels ago is capable of casting invisibility on themselves at will as much as they want, so being able to turn invisible and infiltrate somewhere with our familiar is even better. And as our spell slots continue to level up with us, we will get more and more targets for invisibility. It's just a great spell for Warlocks to have because of that. We also get our Warlock subclass here, of course, and we're going with the Archfey, as I already said. That allows us to cast Misty Step, phenomenal spell, a number of times per day equal to our Charisma modifier, minimum of once, without spending a spell slot. And every time we cast it, whether it's one of those free castings or with a spell slot as normal, we get to tack an extra effect onto it, either giving ourselves or someone else a modest amount of temporary hit points, only a d10, or force nearby enemies from either the point we leave or the point we arrive at to make a wisdom saving throw and taunt them if they fail, forcing them to have disadvantage on attack rolls against everyone but us. Considering we also just teleported, that might be difficult for them to do, so disadvantage to attack our allies. And we can use these effects every time we Misty Step, costing no further resources. Incredible. At character level 6, we get our first ability score increase. I know that's later than some people like, but that's just the nature of multiclassing early. Sharpshooter is an obvious choice, giving us the ability to ignore disadvantage from being too close to enemies, ignoring disadvantage from being too far away from enemies, up to, the maximum distance that we can possibly shoot, and ignoring the armor class bonus that enemies would get from partial cover, meaning if there's anything within our range and not behind full cover, we can shoot it just fine. And that unfortunate 13 dexterity we started the game with is now a nice crunchy 14. Love to see it. At Warlock 5, character level 7, we get our spell slots up to 3rd level, and by extension, our Hail of Thorns deals 3d10, though we can also pick up some gems that are 3rd level spells, like Hypnotic Pattern and Summon Fey. And at this level, we get not 1, but 2 more invocations again. We've unlocked access to Thirsting Blade, so that's an obvious one. Now we can attack twice instead of once with our attack action. That only works with our Pact weapon specifically, but what other weapon do we even need? For the other, we have the freedom to choose. As I was writing the script, I realized Harengon don't have dark vision, So Devil's Sight is an obvious contender, giving us 120 feet of completely unrestrained vision, not even that tiered darkness counts as dim light thing that dark vision usually comes with, and allowing us to see through magical darkness as well. On the other hand, one with shadows allows us to cast invisibility on ourselves at will without a spell slot, as long as we're in dim light or darkness when we cast it. That is also super useful, and considering we have a familiar that, again, can always turn invisible at will, it is super cool to me to be able to do that alongside them, as long as we're not in bright light. Gift of the Depths is good, but a bit campaign-specific. Not everyone finds themselves underwater, ever, even if not often. And Investment of the Chainmaster is very cool, and as much as I like this sprite familiar we have, she's not really the core of the class. She doesn't actually gain that much from Investment of the Chainmaster, considering we're not really needing to charm enemies with her bow that much. Eldritch Smite is always tempting as well, but Hail of Thorns does fill that niche, except that Eldritch Smite doesn't take a bonus action to use. It can be tacked on in sort of the old style, like Divine Smite used to be in the 2014 rules. Eldritch Smite is still that way, where we can just tack on extra damage, and the prone condition if we want, onto an attack without any sort of action cost. That means if we want to, we can stack that on top of Hail of Thorns and deal a ton of damage in one attack, at the cost of both of our Warlock spell slots. That's, right now, a once per short rest trick, but we can do it. As much as I would like one with shadows, I think we're going to have to stick with the invisibility spell normally here, and take Eldritch Smite to have that in our back pocket. Who doesn't love the big damage numbers? Warlock 6 comes with a sweet defensive feature where when we take damage, we can use a reaction to cast Misty Step without a spell slot. Note, that is a different feature allowing us to cast it without a spell slot. That does not use one of our charisma modifier per day Misty Steps. This is a separate thing. And of course, since we're casting Misty Step, we can also tack one of those extra effects onto it, as always. That's a pretty spicy reaction already, and we even get 2 more options for our Misty Step extra effects. Now we can choose to turn invisible until the start of our next turn when we cast Misty Step. Also, I believe ending early if we attack or cast a spell, the usual stuff. Or we can deal 2d10 psychic damage to enemies who fail a wisdom save within 10 feet of either the spot we leave or the spot we arrive at. There's not really one correct time to take our 3rd Ranger level, so let's shoehorn it in right here. We get the Fey Wanderer subclass, further reinforcing the Feywild flavor of the build, and getting some pretty cool side effects as well. We now deal an extra d4 of damage when we hit a creature on our turn. That's not a ton, but it is free and it is always on. And if we hit 2 different creatures, we can deal that d4 to both of them. It's once per turn per target. Once we have more than 2 attacks, we'll be able to do that to more than 2 creatures if we want. Focusing fire on one target is usually tactically the best option, but if our first shot kills something, then we get that extra d4 on whoever we switch to. So that's nice. We also get to add our wisdom modifier to any charisma checks we make. Just all the time, forever. Which means that +3 wisdom modifier we've got is now adding to persuasion, deception, intimidation, and performance checks. If we took that expertise in persuasion earlier, we now have a proficiency bonus of +4 because we're character level 9, meaning that expertise is adding +8, plus our charisma modifier of +3 and our wisdom modifier of +3. We now have +14 to persuasion rolls. Not bad for tier 2. Warlock 7 brings 4th level spells, including from our subclass Greater Invisibility, always prepared. I wasn't really intending to turn this build into a really invisibility heavy thing, but perks of being the Archfey Warlock, I suppose. And of course our Hail of Thorns now deals 4d10, not too shabby. Average of 22 damage, and we get another invocation as well. There's only one new one that we have access to at this level, and that is At Will Speak with Dead. It's a good spell, but if we're not worried about having that, we can just take one of the invocations that we didn't take earlier. Speaking of invisibility, I'm going to go with one with shadows. At this point, we might as well lean in hard. Warlock 8 means we get another feat, and we can finally raise our charisma. In fact, we're going to take the boring option and just raise charisma by 1 and wisdom by 1. That does leave wisdom with an odd number, but don't worry, we're just setting up for later. Our charisma goes up to +4, meaning our attack and damage rolls get better. Our warlock spellcasting, attack rolls, and save DC get better. And we get better at talking to people as well. Warlock level 9 lets us cast Contact Other Plane once per long rest with no chance of failure to contact specifically our patron Archfey directly. We now can pick up the phone and have a direct line to him, her, or them anytime we want it, once per day. We also get another invocation at this level, and there are some incredible options available to us at Warlock 9. Life Drinker becomes available and adds 1d6 damage once per turn every turn when we hit a creature with our packed weapon. 1d6 isn't a ton, but we also can spend a hit die, add our Constitution modifier, and heal for the resulting amount at the same time. Sort of has Vampiric Touch vibes. I think it's plenty good, but I also understand if 1d6 isn't quite good enough in your eyes. In that case, Visions of Distant Realms is a phenomenal one. Being able to cast Arcane Eye, already an incredible spell, as many times as we want, without spell slots or any of that, is frankly probably one of the most powerful things a level 9 character could do, as far as scouting, getting the lay of the land, mapping out a dungeon, things like that, seeing what threats are ahead of us. It's really a phenomenal spell. I'd probably choose this one over Life Drinker myself if I didn't already have an Invisible Familiar. There is some overlap there. This is also a build video where I'm trying to optimize for a specific thing, that being bow damage, so Life Drinker makes a little more sense. But don't worry, Visions of Distant Realms will return. Warlock 10 has a cool Archfey feature that functions kind of like the Rogue's Uncanny Dodge in that we can take a reaction to have incoming damage from an attack against us. It does have to be an attack, so not like a fireball or something that uses a saving throw, but we get attacked plenty, probably, so still good to have on hand. And when we use it, the attacker has to make a Wisdom saving throw, or take psychic damage equal to the damage that we just took. Now, that is the after having damage, but still, using a reaction to both protect our own hit points and deal damage to the creature that hurt us is pretty radical. And we get to do this once for free per long rest, and we can also regain our use of it by spending a Warlock spell slot, a cost that relatively decreases as we continue to get Warlock levels and get more spell slots, which happens the very next level at Warlock 11. We get our third Pact Magic slot, finally, and now we have 3 of those instead of 2. That is 50% more spell slots by volume. At level 11, we also get our first Mystic Arcanum, a 6th level spell that we can cast once per long rest. It doesn't use a spell slot. We also don't get a 6th level spell slot. We can't upcast anything to 6th level, things like that. But we get a 6th level spell that we can cast once per day. That's already what casters usually get, but with a few extra caveats because we're a Warlock. Because it doesn't spend a spell slot, that also means we can spend a spell slot on a bonus action spell, like Misty Step if we're out of free uses, or any other spell we have that has a casting time of a bonus action. So that's cool. Being able to cast a 6th level spell and another leveled spell in the same turn is pretty grand. Most characters can't pull that off. Also, since we're already talking about it, all of those invocations that let us cast a spell for free without a spell slot also get around that 1 slot per turn rule. Warlocks are cool, that's the point. I really like Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron for this, as it gives us a handful of potions that we can use, or our allies can use. So it's sort of a party buff in spell form. We get to spawn in multiple of an uncommon or rare potion. Those could be some pretty cool things like a Potion of Resistance, if we know we're going to be fighting something that uses a particular damage type. Could be a Potion of Growth if we have a lot of martials that can benefit from extra weapon damage and grappling larger creatures, that kind of thing. Potion of Pugilism if we have multiple characters in the party, or just one that we want to juice up all the time, making unarmed strikes. Could even be an Oil of Slipperiness, I don't know. I'm not here to judge. As another aside, I know not everyone plays with the Flock of Familiars spell from Lost Laboratory of Qualish, but it is a very good mental image to summon in a group of sprites, or really any familiar, and give them all potions of fire breathing and let them go to town. That's very funny to me. Even if you're not using that in your game, I just like the mental image of it. Anyway, Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron's my pick for that. There are also good options. The next best one I'd say is probably True Seeing, although put a big ol' asterisk on that one. It is a good choice for now. We'll get there. And at last, level 12, the big one we've been waiting for. We get another invocation and an ability score increase, of course, but invocation first. We can finally pick up Devouring Blade, which allows us to attack 3 times instead of once with our attack action. Something, until the 2024 rules added this for Warlocks, only fighters could do. Technically, that also means a level 12 Warlock could make 4 attacks with their action using the Nick property. That's not what we're doing with this build, but just so you know. Like I mentioned, we also get another feat now, or ability score increase. We're going to do the boring thing again. This is a build that needs ability scores more than it needs feats. We get +2 charisma here, capping us out at 20 and giving us a nice +5 for all of our charisma things, of which we have many. Warlock 13 brings in our 7th level Mystic Arcanum. There are only 4 in the player's handbook to choose from this time, with a couple more coming from other source books. Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything mostly. Dreams of the Blue Veil is wildly campaign specific. Force Cage, while still good, does cost 1,500 gold pieces and our concentration now. And while Warlocks typically have more freedom in concentrating because they don't cast that many spells back to back, it does still cost a lot, and for this character, isn't going to be our first choice. Power Word Pain is kind of just a bad spell, sorry not sorry. Finger of Death is cool, but we're not hurting for single target damage, and we don't really need to spawn zombies either. Etherealness and Plane Shift both rule, and if you want one of those, please by all means take them. Being able to pop around to different planes, whether it's the border ethereal and back, or straight up leaving to somewhere else. But for my part, I'm going with one of my all-time favorite spells, Crown of Stars. This spawns in 7 stars in sort of a crown shape around our head, which shed light, which honestly isn't ideal because we have one with shadows and light disrupts that. But that aside, we get to launch a star as a bonus action up to 7 times because there are 7 stars within the next hour. Spell does not require concentration, so can't be disrupted early by anything short of an anti-magic field or dispel magic, you know what I mean. And when we launch a star, we get to make a spell attack, which we're very good at because we have 20 charisma. And if we hit, we deal 4d12 radiant damage. That is pretty good radiant damage for a bonus action, and we get to do it 7 times. This will help us sustain our damage when we're not burning through spell slots on Hail of Thorns and or Eldritch Smite. So when we know we're going into several fights, several rounds of combat within the next hour, it is an incredible spell to set up early. But even if we just cast it on the first round of a fight, it's still going to be pretty good damage if we know the fight is going to take a while. If we're looking at the enemies and we're thinking maybe like 2 to 3 rounds, probably not worth doing. But if it's like a big fight, probably worth setting up. But most of the time we'll be able to cast this early because it does last an hour. I mentioned single target damage a moment ago, though I realize I haven't really gone over the numbers. So let's take a look. We deal 1d8 plus 6 damage with our longbow. Assuming we don't have a proper magic one, our Pact Magic bow is a +1 weapon, and then 5 more from our charisma bonus, of course. Across 3 attacks, and with the extra d6 from Life Drinker, and let's assume 1d4 from Dreadful Strikes. That could be higher if we attack multiple creatures, but let's just assume 1. We're looking at 37.5 average damage, assuming all 3 hit, which isn't a ton for this level. It's kind of low, but remember that not all of our damage is just coming from the weapon attacks themselves. Hail of Thorns has been dealing 5d10 damage for a while now. That is an average of 27.5. Crown of Stars instead does 26, but costs less. And additionally, we can whip out 6d8 from Eldritch Smite without using a bonus action, and stack it on top of either Crown of Stars or Hail of Thorns, either way. And considering we're Warlocks, we'll get those spell slots back on a short rest anyway. We also have Magic Cunning as of level 2 in Warlock, which I didn't mention, I just realized, but that's okay. We can use an action to get half of our spell slots rounded up back, meaning that the 3 we start with and the 2 we get from Magical Cunning makes 5 5th level spell slots in an adventuring day, plus another 3 for every completed short rest. So 1 short rest, we have 8 spell slots total to play with. 2 short rests, we have 11 spell slots to play with. So we can throw out some damage without having to worry too overly much about it, especially if anyone in our party has a spell like Catnap or Prayer of Healing that allows us to take a short rest in only 10 minutes once per day. If we have both those things in our party, boy, are we cooking with gas. All told, the burst damage totals about 92 damage altogether, which in this day and age is pretty good damage for 1 turn, and that's all without a proper magic weapon or other magic items. For example, a Vicious Longbow, still getting the +1 to damage from Improved Pact Weapon like I mentioned earlier, would add 21 average damage by itself, popping that total pretty well over 100 on its own. We could also be a little cheeky and have, say, a Tome of Leadership and Influence, adding 2 more Charisma for a few points of damage. And we could have something like a Helm of Brilliance, adding a d6 of fire damage to each of those attacks for another 10.5. So plenty overall if we have the right magic items. There are other things I'm sure that we can add to it as well. I'm not going to go over all of those here. I usually try and keep my builds pretty magic item agnostic because I don't know what you're going to have available in your campaign, so I want to not focus on that too much. But the simple fact of the matter is that for marshals and gishes, people who depend on weapon attacks, having a better weapon and a, stronger magic weapon is going to help the thing that we do, which is dealing damage. That's just the fact of how the game works. Not saying every DM should just give you all the items you want right away for no, you gotta earn stuff, is what I'm trying to say, but DMs, please do take into account the items that your characters want, because this is why. Moving forward into Tier 4, the late game, character level 17, Warlock 14, gives us our last subclass feature, Bewitching Magic. When we cast an enchantment or illusion spell with a spell slot with our action, so a lot of qualifiers, if we cast a spell in that manner, we can cast Misty Step without a spell slot as part of the same action. 2 spells, 1 action. That is crazy action economy, and I am here for it. We also get to still tack on an extra effect to our Misty Step. We're casting the spell, we get to do it. And if we want, we could actually cast Misty Step again as a bonus action, if we just really want to teleport a ton. A fair amount of Warlock spells and plenty of the domain spells for the Archfey Warlock are in the Illusion and Enchantment schools, which I'm pretty sure they did on purpose. So we have plenty of options. Things like Synaptic Static and Hypnotic Pattern are perfect for this. So we could, for example, cast Synaptic Static to damage and potentially debuff a bunch of enemies, teleport as part of that action, and use one of those 4 things, maybe give ourselves temporary hit points, and then also lob a star from our crown if we want. And I'm pretty sure only monks and maybe fighters, when they use Action Surge, can reach that level of doing an amount of things in their turn in one singular turn. Needless to say, I'm a fan of this feature. I think it's cool. Warlock 15 comes with another invocation, and at level 15 we gain access to one of the most powerful invocations, period. It's called Witch Sight, and it gives us 30 feet of not just dark vision, not just blind sight, but true sight. Every warlock that reaches level 15 should take this. For anyone unfamiliar, true sight gives us the following benefits. We get to see in magical and non-magical darkness, up to its range of 30 feet. This is just like Devil's Sight, but with less range. We can also see invisible creatures and objects. We can see through illusions and automatically succeed on saving throws against them. Illusions just do nothing to us now, at least within 30 feet. We can discern the true form of any creature whose shape has been changed by magic. That could be spells like Polymorph, True Polymorph, and Shape Change. That could be a druid in wild shape. That could be any number of other things. Arguably lycanthropy, I'd need to check the wording on that. And True Sight also lets us see into the ethereal plane. All of that together means that if there's a thing within 30 feet of us, or metaphysically within 30 feet of our relative position on the ethereal plane, we can see it. Just period. This is why I put that asterisk on True Seeing earlier, the spell, because if we took that as our level 6 Mystic Arcanum, we would want to switch it out now. Every level we gain in Warlock allows us to swap one of our Mystic Arcanum, just like we would swap a normal spell. So go ahead and trade that one out for something else, because we just have always on True Sight now. Granted, the spell gives us a further range for it, so we could extend our True Sight if we want. And we can also cast True Seeing on other creatures, so we could give that to someone else in our party as well. I'm not saying it's not worth having around, but since we have it on ourselves always on, it may be worth taking a different one instead. At this level, we also get our 8th level Mystic Arcanum, and there are some great options. Glibness, as the party face, allows us to treat any roll on the d20 for a charisma check as a 15, and then add our bonuses. This is like an even stronger version of reliable talent, meaning anytime we roll our crazy high persuasion, or our also pretty high deception, etc., we are going to roll a really big number, just period. If we're not that worried about being the party face, or if we think that our raw skills are good enough to handle it, we can also take a spell like Dominate Monster. That would be my next vote if we're not worried about social interaction. Though it's also worth noting, Glibness also works with the charisma check we make as part of Dispel Magic, meaning that we are guaranteed to dispel anything we're trying to dispel. We don't even have to roll the d20 at that point, because we can't fail. Counterspell used to work the same way in the 2014 rules, but doesn't anymore, so Glibness is ever so slightly less useful, but still pretty dang useful. Warlock level 16 comes online at character level 19, which is a thing I did on purpose, because that means we can take an epic boon feat instead of a general one. As always, there are plenty of great options, and as usual, I'm leaning toward the Boon of the Night Spirit, for a couple of reasons. One, we get resistance to 11 damage types as long as we're not in bright light, which is incredible. And two, because we already have one of the effects that this boon gives, so we can actually trade out one with Shadows, our Eldritch Invocation that lets us turn invisible, for a different Eldritch Invocation. Remember how I said Visions of Distant Realms would come back up later? It comes back up now. So because we get this epic boon, we get resistances to a bunch of damage while we're in dim light or darkness. We can turn invisible at will whenever we want, as long as we're in dim light or darkness. And unlike one with Shadows, this is also not the invisibility spell, so we don't have to concentrate on it. That's another added perk. And we get to swap out one with Shadows for Visions of Distant Realms, so because we took this epic boon, we indirectly also get to cast Arcane Eye at will. So, huge ups for this one. We also get to raise our wisdom to a nice even 18, which mostly just serves to bump up our save DC for Hail of Thorns by 1, but hey, it's still good to have on hand. It's also +1 to our wisdom saving throws and our wisdom-based spells. It's never bad to raise our stats. There is just one wrinkle with this choice, and that's that Crown of Stars, as I mentioned earlier, casts bright light around us for its duration, fully shutting off the epic boon, so that's bad. But what is life without a few tactical decisions? If we want to, we can switch out Crown of Stars for a different level 7 spell. Like I said earlier, there are tons of good options. We can take Etherealness, especially now that we can see into the ethereal plane at all times. If we see something on there, like a treasure chest just chilling or something, we can cast Etherealness and go get it, just as an example. But any of those level 7 spells will be a good fit. Especially since at tier 4 we probably have enough gold to cast Force Cage all day, every day, and not worry about it. Or we can keep Crown of Stars and just use it when it's brought out anyway, or when we're not as worried about taking damage. When we're feeling confident in our ability to survive. I would like to shout out an honorable mention for this, the Boon of Dimensional Travel, just because it's a little ridiculous with the rest of the way the Archfey Warlock works, and I think it's hilarious. That lets us teleport up to 30 feet. Note, that's not casting the Misty Step spell. It's a separate teleport. But it lets us teleport up to 60 feet when we take the attack action or the magic action, meaning if we cast something like Hypnotic Pattern or Synaptic Static, we can immediately teleport 30 feet. We can cast Misty Step as part of the action and teleport another 30 feet and activate a secondary effect. And if we wanted to, we could even use our bonus action to cast another Misty Step and activate another secondary effect, teleporting a total of 90 feet across 3 little jumps and getting some extra benefits to boot. It's not as good as Boon of the Night Spirit, in my opinion, but it is quite funny. So if you're in it for the meme, it could be a lot of fun. We can already teleport so much on this build that I think it's more silly than it is useful. And finally, character level 20, Warlock level 17. We get a 4th Pact Magic spell slot, and we get our last Mystic Arcanum, level 9 spell. There are 9 spells of 9th level, fittingly, in the Warlock spell list, including the player's handbook and the other sort of core first-party supplement books. So we have plenty that we can dig through and choose. It's Foresight. The answer is Foresight. 8 hours of advantage on all of our d20 tests, and enemies having disadvantage on attacks against us, just flat across the board, is huge. I love this spell because it makes us that much better at everything our character does, everything we have been building toward for the entire length of our character's adventuring career. It is a spell that just says, hey, you do stuff, do it better. And I love that. It's an incredible spell, especially because our build is regularly making 3 or 4 attacks, so having advantage on all of them all of the time just means that we're practically guaranteed to hit, and we'll be critting that much more also. In all fairness, though, there are actually lots of really good options. Psychic Scream from Xanathar's Guide to Everything is an incredible spell that can stun multiple enemies, potentially forever if they can't make that saving throw. True Polymorph is really good, but it's kind of the opposite of Foresight in that it doesn't make us better at the things we do, it turns us into an entirely different creature. And those creatures can be really awesome things, like dragons and beholders and stuff. But personally, I'm not a huge fan of just setting my character sheet aside and playing as a different creature for a bit. Actually, that's not even really true. I do enjoy doing that, but as my capstone, this is my ultimate power spell, my ultimate power move. I would rather be my character. You know what I mean? I hope that makes sense outside of my head. It is an incredibly powerful spell, do not get me wrong. And if we had, say, a simulacrum or a party member that maybe doesn't feel like playing their own character that day, turning them into a dragon or some such would still be an incredibly strong move. Blade of Disaster is also on the Warlock list, and that is an incredibly strong single target damage option, dealing 10d6 on each of 2 hits as a bonus action. Way better than Crown of Stars, and every other spell that attacks as a bonus action that has ever existed. The spell just got buffed in the new Heroes of Faerun book, not sponsored, WotC, and can now move up to 60 feet as part of that bonus action and still attacks twice. It now deals 10d6 instead of 4d12, It used to be on par with Crown of Stars damage-wise, except that it's 2 attacks. And it used to deal 8 extra d12 instead of 4 on a critical hit, which it gets on 18 through 20. That part's still true. Now it does normal critical damage of double the damage dice, which is still 20d6, which is still a lot. That is a buff because its damage is now 9 points higher on not a crit, and 8 points lower on a critical hit, but still, it's a lot of damage. So if you're not quite as big a Foresight fan as I am, feel free to take Blade of Disaster. It is an unbelievably strong option. The blade can also pass through any barrier, including constructs of force, like Wall of Force and Force Gauge, so literally no enemy is safe from you with this thing. But again, for my part, Foresight makes us better at all the things that we do, all the things that we've been doing all 20 levels, and really, what better capstone could we ask for than that? In reflecting on all of that, with the build now fully together, there are a few things that caught my attention while I was putting this video together. First, weapon builds are pretty well at the mercy of the magic items they find. Not entirely. We do plenty of damage ourselves as well, but like I was saying earlier, having magic items helps a lot. There is a massive difference between having 20 charisma and a de facto +1 longbow, thanks to improved pact weapon, and having, say, 22 charisma with a Tome of Leadership and Influence, a vicious longbow that also gets the +1 from improved pact weapon, and a Helm of Brilliance, adding yet another d6 of fire damage to each attack. I believe I said that earlier, but to get some numbers in here without the other add-ons like Eldritch Smite and our bonus actions, it's the difference between 37.5 damage per attack action and 72 damage. Nearly double before adding those other riders. So again, hopefully along the way we pick up some damage boosting gear. Second, Great Weapon Master would have added plenty of damage to this build. It's basically the only feat that adds damage now, at least the general feats. Well, aside from Charger, but that's not going to work with a ranged weapon anyway. But adding strength into a build like this is immensely costly. I tried so hard, believe you me. I make some sacrifices in my builds that a lot of players probably wouldn't go for, but trying to work in the 13 strength prerequisite for Great Weapon Master and sacrificing one of our limited ability score increase / feats on it was too far even for me. I'm going to be honest, it doesn't feel great dealing about 10.5 damage per attack in tier 3 and 4, mid to high level, but there aren't a ton of things that we can add to it now that Sharpshooter doesn't add damage. And I don't think that's really a problem per se, because ranged attacking is already so much better than melee, in that we can choose our targets really easily, and we don't have to be up in the fight of getting hit as much, and we don't run the risk really of not being able to reach our enemies. That's a thing with melee combat too. We have a range of 600 feet with a longbow. If we can pretty much see it, we can pretty much hit it. In a lot of locations anyway. So I don't mind that range damage is harder to squeeze more points out of than melee combat with things like Great Weapon Master. I just want to be clear that's not a complaint at all, just an observation on how much harder it is to squeeze out damage. In 2014 rules, getting up to like the low 20s with ranged attacks is pretty easy once you have enough of an attack bonus to make Sharpshooter worthwhile, which was pretty ridiculous. And I'm not mad that that's changed. It does feel a little lackluster only doing like 10.5 average damage with our attacks, not including Hail of Thorns and all that. But that's where magic weapons come in. Third, and then I'll stop rambling at you. You may notice that I didn't highlight Spirit Shroud, which would add another d8 or 2d8 to our attacks, because that spell only adds damage to targets that are within 10 feet of us. And if I'm going to make an archer character, I'm going to make an archer character that stands back and shoots and takes advantage of having a ranged weapon. If I want to attack from 10 feet away, there are pole arms for that. I'm not saying that I would never do it, and I'm not saying that it's a bad idea by any means, but it's just not really my style. Conjure Minor Elementals isn't on the Warlock spell list, but that's the poster child for adding damage to attacks these days, and it still has the same limitation. You have to be within 10 feet. Divine Favor, unfortunately, doesn't affect ranged weapons. That would have been a nice little add. Although, again, squeezing in strength to the build would have been entirely too costly, so I still wouldn't have done it. But hypothetically, it is a good spell, just not for ranged weapons. Holy Weapon is an incredible spell, but it's too high level to also have Devouring Blade, which is really unfortunate. I have a Fighter Cleric that is Fighter 11, Cleric 9, and has Holy Weapon and makes 3 attacks with his actions, and it's so much fun, and I wish the Warlock could enjoy the same spread of abilities, but it's simply not to be, unfortunately, because Devouring Blade is at level 12 instead of the Fighter's level 11. And while that can still be good with 2 attacks, it is a very different build anyway. I really wish Tensor's Transformation was on the Warlock spell list, but unfortunately it isn't. That would have easily been option number 1 for our level 6 Mystic Arcanum, but it's not on the list, so unfortunately we can't do it. And as for Ranger stuff, Guardian of Nature and Swift Quiver both require way too many Ranger levels. That would have also been an incredibly different build. With all of that said, we still do some pretty good damage between our attacks and our spells and Eldritch Smite. All of that working together to make the damage numbers go burr. Plus, we can always just drop a proper spell instead of firing our bow, like a normal Warlock would. A Synaptic Static against a bunch of targets is still going to do, such good numbers. A Hypnotic Pattern that knocks out, 2/3 of our enemies is still pretty much a one-shot enemy party wipe. I want to be clear, I'm not complaining about this build's damage by any means. I often use Disintegrate as sort of like a real quick benchmark, not a serious standard, but just a quick comparison to see if I'm out-damaging what a random wizard can do with a 6th level spell slot, and this build exceeds that spell's 75 average damage pretty easily without having to spend too many resources at once, so I'm happy with it. This build has been a long time coming. I've wanted to make a Hail of Thorns build for pretty much as long as I've known that the spell exists. Its AoE isn't big enough to actually hit multiple creatures all the time, but when it does come up, it is really nice. That is, like I've mentioned, a thing that none of the Smite spells can do, so this is one that we can do as a response to hitting with an attack that also affects other creatures, and I think that's really cool. As I'm sure no one's really shocked by, the spell by itself isn't really enough to carry a build, but as one piece of this balanced breakfast, I think it does a pretty good job. It's roughly equivalent to a Smite spell damage-wise anyway, and you know Paladins love their Smites. It's also really good against mounted enemies. I think I mentioned that earlier, but I want to make sure I say that. I've also wanted to make a Warlock Archer for a really long time, just never kind of got around to it, and now that Devouring Blade exists and they can make 3 attacks with their action instead of 2 or 1, it is an even better time to do that than it's ever been. Anyway, I said I'd stop rambling, and that is about all I have to say for today. Thank you so much for watching. This one was a bit longer and took a bit longer to put together. Oh boy. If you watched it all the way to the end, I appreciate you. If you didn't watch all the way to the end, you're not seeing this. Is this a funny bit? I do it in every video. But I appreciate everyone who watches, even if they don't watch all the way. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and fire many magic arrows into the hearts of your enemies. Please remember that D&D is for everybody. Be excellent to each other. I hope you have a good week, and I will see you in the next one. See you later.